Hey guys, it's Khadroth again. So we're going to start a new series of videos today. One's on more basic concepts of the game that I see people just kind of mess up all the time or not quite understand. Maybe they're not explained well in other places, but I think it's something that's going to help you guys be able to take your gameplay to the next level and make better choices when you're struggling in a situation. So this first video is going to cover noble phantasms and everything about them, because I often see people get aspects of these wrong. So just to start out with, these video guides that I'm going to be producing here should be on the shorter side, so don't expect very, very long videos, but I will try to explain them as best I can in as concise of a manner. So probably the first misconception or misinformation I see out there is that cards don't affect noble phantasms. This is mostly true. If you have a noble phantasm in just regular cards, where you put it doesn't really matter for the purposes of the noble phantasm. However, there are some nuances that can really affect this. And so that's why it's kind of not always true, especially now. Whereas at the beginning of the game, when it was first out, there weren't really mechanics in place that could affect noble phantasms, but now we have some interesting ones. So to start out here, cards do not, in fact, normally impact the noble phantasm. I want to be clear on that. That is to say, if you tried to put an arts card lead in front of, say, a quick MP, no, it will not make the quick MP generate more noble phantasm. If you put a buster card in front of the MP, no, it will not make the noble phantasm right after it do more damage. That's what I'm talking about here, not the noble phantasm chains, which can impact noble phantasm damage, but we'll get into that in a minute. However, card choice does matter. You guys are going to see some scenarios where people maybe choose things on a YouTube video or a Twitch stream that you maybe don't anticipate. You're like, why did they put those cards there in that order? And a lot of the time there is a strategy to it, either to do more damage in front of the NP to get more overkill. Overkill can lead to more noble phantasm being generated for another NP after the fact, or it might be to maybe target different enemies and kill them first so that the noble phantasm acts as a break in the chain. This is another thing that I don't see often talked about, but your card order can matter in the sense that you can use it to manipulate the enemies to be able to damage different ones. So to give you an example, if I were to say buster card on the first enemy and kill it, the noble phantasm then would go off on the second enemy. If that noble phantasm kills that unit, it's another break in the chain, and your third card, if you're doing a brave chain here, and extra card will all hit the third enemy. So even with a single target noble phantasm in this concept, you can actually kill an entire wave. There are certain strategies that you can employ. The saying that cards don't necessarily matter here isn't always true. They don't affect the noble phantasm in most cases, but you can use them strategically to your benefit. And just to very quickly cover that, what you'll see on screen right here is an actual calculation we did for the Okita buff that she got for her carding capability, and we kind of tried to figure out where was the best placement of her cards, what would do the most damage. And oftentimes in, say, a quick noble phantasm's case, it might be better if you have a brave chain to put the buster card first. It might make the subsequent cards after the MP do more damage. It won't make the MP do more damage, but it might make the third card and the extra card do more. Same thing for possibly putting an arts card at the front in front of an NP. It might make the third card or the extra card generate more noble phantasm. So there are strategies that you can employ for that. So now you're probably saying, well, Cad, then nothing really does impact the MP, so why did you say that? Well, because there's two sets of circumstances where it does. One of those is going to be command codes. There's going to be a command code that has Da Vinci on it later that actually can increase the noble phantasm damage of a subsequent card in that turn. So if you were to say slap that on a buster card and throw that first in the chain and then do the noble phantasm after that, that command code will make the noble phantasm do more damage, but only because that's its specified use. Similarly, there are skills out there in servants kits that can make other noble phantasms do more damage. Let's take Hokusai, for instance, where she has the defense down proc on arts cards with her third skill. So if you were to take two arts cards and put them in front of Hokusai's MP, you're not going to necessarily get a lot of refund on the back end with that, but in the front end, you would have put two extra defense downs on, and then when the noble phantasm triggers in the third card, it'll do more damage. Like I said, there are strategies that can be employed depending on the servant servant you're using. I don't want to get too deep into those what if scenarios and just tell you to have your eyes open to them and be on the lookout for them, because you can use them strategically to help you, but otherwise, no, in most cases, cards do not impact the MP. Another thing that I see people get relatively confused about is the differences in the card types of NPs and how to use them, basically. Buster cards everyone has that in their mind. Oh, they will hit the hardest. And when we actually look at the relative adjusted damage for Noble Phantasms, and this is kind of a standard average sort of deal. Obviously, there are exceptions to this rule, but typically, if we're just looking at the adjusted damage, that's the smaller numbers down here that are a little bit harder to see. But say if we're taking a single target NP1 for Buster, Arts, and Quick here, even though they have different percentiles here, they actually end up dealing roughly the same, with Quick getting a little bit of an edge. And my understanding of that is that it has to do with that whole numbers are a little bit easier to work with, and it may also be a little bit of bias to help out the naturally weak Quick card in other circumstances. But essentially, you guys should understand that for the most part, these Noble Phantasms are actually supposed to do very similar groupings of damage. So then what's the difference, you might ask? Well, the difference tends to be specific to each individual servant. It tends to be things like a servant may have a higher attack value, a servant may have better buffs in their kit, a servant might have better attributes on their Noble Phantasm, say a defense down that triggers before the NP or something like that. All of these things, including trait damage and stuff like that, can really impact the amount of damage that gets done with a Noble Phantasm. So that's why there's so many different values out there for the various card types, and it's why you can't just take this as law. But just to understand, I wanted to display this for you guys. Now, where you want to use Noble Phantasms largely depends on the type of the Noble Phantasm. Typically speaking, I would tell you that you want to use it as the first card. There are some exceptions to this, obviously, but basically for, say, Buster cards, as you guys know, if you put a Buster card first in a chain, it will make all subsequent cards do more damage. The Noble Phantasm Buster type can trigger that. So even though it is not impacted by that bonus, it can be used to trigger the bonus for other cards. And this is a concept that I see a lot of people getting confused by. Say if you were to put an Arts Noble Phantasm first, it's not going to enhance the Noble Phantasm generated by the NP, but it will impact the amount of NP gain that you get on subsequent cards after the NP. That's why you'll often see Noble Phantasms getting placed first. They can be used to trigger the card type bonus and can help the other cards coming later, and it's probably a good idea to put them first because they don't get impacted themselves. If you put them first, you're basically saying, okay, in a chain of cards, the first card tends to do the least damage, the second card does a little bit more, and the third card does the most. That's why you put the MP first, because you're getting more bang for your buck out of the other two cards then by doing that. But like I said before, there are exceptions, like putting the Buster card first. And typically speaking, one of the bigger exceptions often occurs with Quick Noble Phantasms. Quick is a very weak card normally to lead with. It just doesn't do a lot of damage, and it tends to not have the best of bonuses in terms of generating stars. Now, there are certain times where you do want to generate stars, so you will see a Quick Noble Phantasm getting placed first. Most of the time, I'm going to say you're probably going to value that extra damage from Buster or that extra Noble Phantasm generated from Arts. Those tend to be the better things, especially because when you really need stars, it tends to be something that you can get via other methods. Now, that's not to say that leading with Quick first is a bad thing either. A lot of things that I think people don't understand, and we'll probably cover this in a later video, but that's that if you get 3 cards of the same type in a Brave chain, so one unit doing 3 cards of the same type, the one you guys are all familiar with is Buster, 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 right? If you do that, then that makes the extra attack do more damage. And you're probably thinking, well, yeah, that's because of the Buster, right? Well, yes, the Buster card lead will make it do more, but also if you do Arts, 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 the extra attack will do more damage. So that's something that I see a lot of people not considering at times, and this can outweigh your other normal standard choices. So it is something to pay attention to. But ultimately, since this is a Noble Phantasm video, I'm not going to get too deep into that. Okay, so the last concept I'd really like to cover with you guys here in this guide is going to be the difference between Noble Phantasm and Overcharge level. I often see new players getting this wrong, getting it confused, and it's understandable as to why. It's a tricky system, so to speak. But let's break it down for you in layman's terms. I see people saying, hey Cad, doesn't increasing the Noble Phantasm level always increase damage? And yes, for the most part it does, unless we're talking about, say, a support Noble Phantasm that doesn't deal damage. And even then, increasing the level typically will have a very good effect, increasing healing or stars generated or something like that. Essentially, increasing your Noble Phantasm level, aka getting more copies of a unit, will lead to more damage. The Overcharge rank is where I see people having the most confusion. And how Overcharge works is, no, it does not always lead to more damage. How it works is you get more Overcharge from various things, either putting consecutive NPs back to back in a chain, or having things that can increase the Overcharge rank, a la craft essences like Demonic Bodice Vada, having skills like Kama, who's upcoming here on NA, having her first skill that can increase the Overcharge rank. These things can increase the Overcharge effect, but the Overcharge effect doesn't have to lead to more damage. It just depends on each individual Noble Phantasm. So you're probably saying, well, crap, how the heck do I keep this all straight? Because there's so many different Overcharge effects out there. I myself, after years of playing the game, tend to know most of the Overcharge effects for units, but even once in a while I'll get them wrong too. So instead I just try to learn which ones actually do increase damage output. A very easy way to do this is to try and go in and look at the servant and say, does the Overcharge increase card strength? Does it increase attack power? Does it increase Noble Phantasm damage? Does it increase defense down on an enemy or something like that? And does it activate first? One of the sites I really like to use for this is actually Fandom. They often will say right in there, activates first. So that gives you a good idea of whether or not that Overcharge effect is going to occur before or after the MP. And if it occurs before the MP, yes, it will in fact increase damage. So at that point, the strategy behind it then becomes, you might want to place a Noble Phantasm whose Overcharge increases damage later in the chain because it'll get a higher Overcharge rank. Or you might want to find ways to increase the Overcharge. Demonic Bodice Vada, for instance, can be a really good craft essence to use on someone like Arash, who has an insane Overcharge on his Noble Phantasm. These are the things that I often see people getting confused. But essentially, what you're looking at here too is there can be a strategy for how to employ these Overcharges. I often see people getting confused about, like, okay, they have a damage dealing Noble Phantasm with a damage dealing Overcharge, but they also have a support Noble Phantasm. What do? It depends on your situation. Maybe you need the damage output to clear that wave. Maybe you don't quite, and maybe you should put the support one second. Maybe you're in a longer, more drawn out fight and you really need to prioritize whatever that Overcharge support NP gives, something like more healing, more stars, or even more refund for NP in, like, say, Tamamo's case. Oftentimes what I see people trying to do, if they're in, say, an art stall combo, is they'll do the damage dealing NP first, maybe a Merlin or a Tamamo after that. Or say if you had a waiver, you would want to put that before the MP oftentimes, because that defense down will land on the enemy in his NP and then make the damage dealing NP hit harder. Like I said, there are strategies you can employ, but please understand that difference. Noble Phantasm levels will always increase damage, assuming it's a damage dealing NP, but Overcharge effects might increase damage. They might not as well. It just depends. Okay guys, I hope you liked this guide. Again, we're going to be trying to do a little bit more of these in the future. The next one I'll probably try to cover carding concepts with you guys. I'm not probably going to go at the breakneck pace we were for some of the event guides, but I will try to produce these as soon as possible. And again, as always, guys, you can check me out on Twitter or Twitch. You guys can join the Discord. The link will be in the description below. And also, I am having that art contest right now for the new mascot we're going to have for the channel. So feel free to check that out if you guys are artistically inclined. But until next time, guys, good luck, and may the courts be with you.